Have you ever wondered how the conflict between Russia and Ukraine started? The roots of this conflict can be traced back to the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s. When the Soviet Union disintegrated, Ukraine declared its independence, marking the beginning of an era of transformation. Ukraine, with its rich history and diverse culture, began to establish a distinct national identity, one that was often at odds with Russia's vision for the region. The cultural and political differences between the two nations over the years created an undercurrent of tension, which was exacerbated by Russia's strong desire to maintain its influence over its former Soviet territories. The annexation of Crimea by Russia in 2014 marked a pivotal moment in this long-standing conflict. Russia's controversial move, widely condemned by the international community, heightened the tensions and set the stage for an outright confrontation. Ukraine and the rest of the world watched in shock as Crimea was swallowed up by its powerful neighbor, an act that starkly demonstrated Russia's willingness to redraw the borders of Europe. So the stage was set for a conflict that would shake not just the region but the entire world. Now let's dive into the key events that have marked the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The year 2014 marked a significant turning point in the Russia-Ukraine relationship. Russia annexed Crimea, a move that was widely condemned by the international community. This event led to widespread conflict in eastern Ukraine, a region with a significant Russian-speaking population. The war in eastern Ukraine was brutal and unrelenting, with both sides accusing the other of human rights abuses. Moving forward to the year 2021, we saw an escalation of tensions. The largest buildup of Russian troops on the Ukrainian border since the annexation of Crimea was a cause for international alarm. Investors around the globe reduced exposure to Russia and Ukraine due to fears of an outright war. Despite this, the market positioning was not cautious enough, according to some investors. At this point, the role of the United States and the European Union became even more crucial. A phone call between US President Joe Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin partially alleviated concerns about escalation and sanctions. Biden proposed a summit meeting and emphasized US commitment to Ukraine's territorial integrity. Despite these diplomatic efforts, the potential for conflict remained high. In the wake of these events, the year 2023 saw further escalation in the conflict. Russia faced the risk of sanctions, which could impact major businesses and sovereign debt. Ukraine, with its smaller economy, weaker reserves, and larger debt, was more vulnerable to conflict escalation. The tensions with Russia and a recent spike in COVID-19 infections threatened Ukraine's economic recovery and prospects. Meanwhile, other international players began to shift their stance. Israel, for instance, which had maintained strict neutrality in the conflict, began reconsidering its policy on the Ukraine war under the leadership of Benjamin Netanyahu. And that brings us to today, with tensions still high and the conflict unresolved. But what does this conflict mean for Ukraine, Russia, and the world at large? Today we find ourselves in a world where the conflict between Russia and Ukraine is more than just regional tension, it's a matter of global concern. The economic and social impacts of this conflict are far-reaching, affecting not just these two nations but the world at large. In Ukraine, the reality is harsh. With a smaller economy, weaker reserves, and larger debt, the nation is more vulnerable to the escalation of the conflict. The tensions with Russia, coupled with a recent spike in COVID-19 infections, threaten Ukraine's economic recovery and the prospects for GDP warrant holders. It's a situation that requires not just regional, but global attention and support. On the other side, Russia faces its own set of challenges. The largest buildup of Russian troops on the Ukrainian border since 2014 has led to a reduction in exposure to Russian local bonds and the Russian ruble by some investors. This conflict could also lead to the imposition of sanctions, which could impact major businesses and sovereign debt. The longer-term economic growth of Russia may be at risk due to concerns around geopolitics and lack of investment. The global implications of this conflict are just as significant. Sanctions against Russia could potentially disrupt global alliances, creating a ripple effect on international relations. Furthermore, the conflict has already impacted global energy markets. The prices of natural gas have seen a significant drop since the escalation of the conflict, reaching levels last seen before Russia invaded Ukraine. This decrease in prices, while beneficial to consumers in the short term, could lead to increased volatility in the energy markets. This conflict also brings into focus the shifting power dynamics on the global stage. Nations are being forced to reassess their alliances and their strategic interests. Israel, for instance, has maintained a strict neutrality in this conflict, but recent developments have led to a shift in its stance. While the future remains uncertain, one thing is clear: the Russia-Ukraine conflict is more than a regional dispute. It's a global issue with far-reaching implications. As history unfolds, we watch, we learn, and we hope for peace.